Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Truckers Podcast, FYI. I'm your host, Doug from Ontario, Canada. It is 8:36 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here on the 30th of August, Friday, the start to the Labor Day weekend. Wow. So I was just sitting here reading some news articles before I came on air. And I'm in a group of friends. We message back and forth quite often. And a mass text comes through anybody who is in the hockey world, who watches hockey, you're a fan of hockey, you play the game at the professional level, or just pick up hockey with your friends. The Columbus Blue Jackets, you've probably heard of this hockey player, Johnny Gaudreau, also known as Johnny Hockey, and his brother have died. This is just tragic. My heartfelt condolences goes out to their families, their friends, their teammates, their fans. This is just unimaginable. I'll mention a little bit further in the show again, but it is Labor Day, the start of Labor Day weekend. Here, all across North America. So let's talk about how it began. How did Labor Day come into the way it is today of unions? Before I get started here, I better put my phone on mute because a lot of the messages are coming through right now. History of Labor Day in Canada. 1872. The fight for a shorter work week. Imagine working at least 10 or more hours a day, every day. That's what many of Toronto's print workers' daily lives looked like in 1872. When the Toronto Typographical Union demanded a 9-hour workday from the city's publishers. Employers refused, and the printers walked off the job on March the 25th, 1872. Publishers hired replacement workers, but the strikers had earned widespread support from the Toronto workers. The result, a crowd of 10,000 supporters showed up for a daily rally at Queen's Park on April 15th, 1872. In those days, union activities was criminal, and then the Toronto Globe publisher George Brown and the strike committee arrested for criminal conspiracy the next day. The community protested in support of those arrested. And at the time, Prime Minister John A. Macdonald, no friend of publisher and reform political George Brown, introduced the Trade Union Act on April the 18th, 1872, legalizing and protecting unions. The strike in Toronto evolved into the 9-hour movement. Toronto printers led to annual celebrations of Labor Day, celebrated today in communities across Canada every single year. Workers' movements had begun to develop as the early 1850s, but it was the need for a shorter work week, that galvanized the movement and convinced more workers that joining unions would change their lives for the better. Shorter work weeks, from working 12 to 14 hours a day to 9 hours a day. People want a 4-day work week. People today who work for the government or whatever the case want to work from home. In 1919, they had the Winnipeg General Strike. The year 1919 saw soldiers returning home after World War I to find high unemployment rates and inflation. They couldn't get their jobs back, and social tension was high. Workers in various trades wanted fair wages, much like the workers today. They just wanted to earn enough to be able to support their families in the changing economy, just like today. So at 11 a.m. on May 15th, 1919, workers walked off the job and marched into the streets of Winnipeg, leading to one of the biggest labor actions Canada has ever seen. Strikers included both the private and public sectors and ranged from garment workers to police officers. On June 21st, 1919, the Royal Northwest Mounted Police and hired union busters rode on horseback and fired into the crowd of thousands of workers, killing 2 and injuring countless others. The infamous Bloody Saturday marked the end of the strike. This was the largest general strike in Canadian history and set the stage for future labor reforms. The birth of the unemployment insurance. So if you get laid off, you got a percentage of money from the government. So during the economic depression of 1929-1939, young, unemployed men had to work in government work camps for paltry wages in isolated locations. In pursuit of a living wage, workers in Vancouver abandoned the camps, launching a strike. After striking for 2 months with no relief in sight, they took their case directly to Ottawa, traveling by rail and on foot. The journey became known as the On to Ottawa Trek. Good morning and welcome to the show. It is Labor Day weekend, the beginning of the Labor Day weekend. Can't even believe I'm even saying that already. It's like the end of August. So how did the Labor Day come about in Canada? Just a bit of a recap for you. The fight for a shorter work week in 1872. 1919, the Winnipeg General Strike. The birth of the unemployment insurance. And that was during the economic depression of 1929-1939. So this march to Ottawa was stopped by the RCMP on orders from Ottawa, and after rioting and arrests of union leaders, the strike ended. Mackenzie King's Liberals won the next election, and they legislated against the repressive conservative government abolishing the camps. So this epic strike and trip captured the hearts and minds of Canadians and gave birth to unemployment insurance in 1940. Canada was the last major Western country to adopt an employment insurance system, which obviously is still active today if you're laid off from your job. It's called employment insurance, not unemployment insurance today. Right? Today we refer to the system as the employment insurance, or EI, and research has shown that EI was the single most important economic stabilizer in the past recessions. In 1945, Windsor's Ford strike. In 1945, Windsor's complex employment 14,000 auto workers, making it Canada's largest workplace. Times were tough. Wartime production was slowing down, and many companies, including Ford, wanted to break some of the gains that had been made by unions for workers since the Depression. Union dues were still voluntary, meaning United Auto Workers Local 200 had the near impossible task of collecting dues from 14,000 members each month. And the union needed more security if it was going to survive and protect the gains it had made for its members. And then Ford announced it was laying off 1,500 workers. Then the negotiations broke down over union demands that would have made union membership mandatory and seeing dues automatically deducted from workers' pay and handed to the union, something Ford had agreed to in another plant. Workers had also demanded a paid 2-week annual vacation. I mean, just think this was back in 1945. On September the 12th, 1945, the union struck. It was a new and inexperienced union, but the workers had cultivated community support, and the Ford's confrontational tactic fostered even more solidarity. And the union was able to fend off attempts to break the picket lines with the support of 800 members from the UAW Local 195, employed at another Windsor Auto Company, who stayed off work without strike pay for another month. To prevent a violent confrontation with police, the strikers parked their own cars in streets all around the plant, forming a blockade that lasted 3 days. So the federal cabinet back in that day, in 1945, they intervened to get bargaining going again. And a tentative settlement based on the union's pre-strike offer of bringing arbitration on all union security matters was defeated by the local, now militant members. The workers would only go back to work after Martin assured the union he would appoint a sympathetic arbitrator that got the deal passed. So on December the 9th, after 99 days on the picket line, workers voted return to work. So the Rand decision, everyone who benefits should contribute. So this was 6 weeks after the Ford workers were back on the job. The arbitrator, a Supreme Court judge, brought down his award rejecting mandatory union membership, but approving automatic dues checkoff. So in his decision ruled that because everyone in the workplace benefits from the union, everyone should contribute to the union. So as a result, in the court decisions, dues checkoff can be included in the collective agreement at the request of the union in most provinces, and most become known as the Rand formula. That means unions can cover the cost of bargaining, enforcing collective agreements, and campaigns that advance the interests of their members. So they were pooling resources. This way means workers have the support they need when grievances to the arbitration or when they force to strike and without strike pay. They'll pay your union dues. In 1956, founding of the Canadian Labour Congress. And by the 1950s, the time had come for a single country wide labor organization to help unions work together around common goals: industrial growth, the rising influence of big business, and expanding government involvement in the social and economic life of the countries demanded a strong, unified voice for working Canadians. That led to the creation of the CLC in 1956, the Canadian Labour Congress. In 1965, public service workers win bargaining rights. And because of unions, public service workers in Canada have decent pay, benefits, and pensions, but they had to fight to win those gains. And now the public workers, they have to be now coming up, I guess, starting in September. They got to be in the office 3 days a week. They're fighting that because they don't want to be in the office 3 days a week. They want to be sitting at home in their pajamas, working from home. They get decent pay. They get benefits. And everything that they're enjoying today. And of course, their pensions. And then back in 1965, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers wanted the right to bargain collectively, the right to strike, higher wages, and better management. They defied government policies and staged an illegal countrywide strike. And this strike would go down in history as one of the largest wildcat strikes in Canada. It lasted 2 weeks and ended with the government extending collective bargaining rights to the entire public service, although some workers, such as the RCMP and the military, were excluded. And today, public service unions like the Public Service Alliance of Canada, the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada, and the Canadian Association of Professional Employees continue to fend off attempts by governments to roll back wages, pensions, and benefits for federal government workers. The right to safety at work. In the 1960s, exploitation of workers, especially immigrants, was still widespread and was still widespread today. Many barely earned enough to support their families, lived in fear of deportation, and were forced to work in very unsafe working conditions. Many unable to speak English were unaware of any rights they did have. Still, that problem is going on today. So on March 17th, 1960, 5 Italian immigrant workers climbed 35 feet underground to continue the work on a tunnel in Hoggs Hollow under the Don River near Old York Mills Road on Yonge Street in Toronto. The tunnel was just 6 feet in diameter, and the men had to crawl underneath a 36-inch water main running through it to pass each other. They hadn't been equipped with hard hats or flashlights. So when a fire broke out, they were trapped, unable to see the way out, blocked anyway by smoldering cables on one side and a cement tunnel support wall on the other. Panicked rescue workers shut down the air to the tunnel, caused a cave-in, and as compression was lost, the men suffered and tortured of the nitrogen bubbling up in their bloodstreams. The floor hadn't been properly sealed with cement, so when water was finally poured into to fight the fire, a torrential flood of mud buried the men alive. They died of carbon monoxide poisoning and suffocation from inhaling smoke, sand, and water. So this tragedy became the catalyst for reforms in occupational health and safety. Unions led the fight to get the Ontario government to take workplace health and safety seriously, leading to the passing of the Industrial Safety Act. Now, the Act was the foundation of Canada's Labour Safety Code that passed later that decade. It clearly outset laws and regulations for safety of workers in Canada. And Saskatchewan then took this further, passing the Occupational Health Act, considered the first legislation of its kind in North America. And this still exists today, and making health and safety the joint responsibility of management and workers. Unions fought hard to give Canadians three important areas of power: the right to refuse unsafe work, the right to know about hazards in the workplace, and the right to participate in health and safety discussions. And unions fight hard every day to keep forcing employers to fulfill their obligations to keep workers safe. The maternity and parental benefits. And I didn't know this. So, did you know that paid maternity leave benefits have only been around since 1971 in Canada? Before that, a new mother had to quit work or return to work quickly if her family depended on her income. And while the federal government, through the unemployment insurance program, introduced a limited 15 weeks of paid maternity leave in 1971, and at 66% of mothers' previous salary, it was only a short time later when unions began negotiating longer paid maternity leave with higher levels of benefits for their members that topped up the portion of salary paid by unemployment insurance benefits. And unions also began negotiating guarantees that women could return to the jobs they held before their maternity leave, paternity leave, and leave for parents who adopted children. So at the beginning of the 1960s, just over 30% of women aged 20 to 30 participated in the Canadian labor force. And by the end of 1970s, it had doubled to just over 60%. And in 2012, over 70% of young women were participating in the labor force. And today, 70% of mothers with children under 5 years of age are working. Now, of course, by bargaining better paid maternity leave for its members, and they didn't stop at just maternity leave. As early as 1979, Quebec's Common Front, representing government, education, and health workers, negotiated 20 weeks of fully paid maternity, 10 weeks leave when parents adopted a child, and 5 days of maternity leave in 1981 after a 42-day strike. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers won postal workers across Canada 17 weeks of paid maternity leave. So the concept of longer periods of paid maternity leave then was available through unemployment insurance benefits, soon became a mainstream and expanded to the country. So this is, women take maternity leave. It is the same as employment insurance. But today, mothers can take up to a full year of maternity leave. So Labor Day Monday, marks the day of all the changes that came about in the labor movement from 1872 here in Canada. Now, at the beginning of the show, I just, I'm in a group text of friends, and while I was getting ready to do my show, if you are a hockey fan, you don't have to be a hockey fan, but if you are, you watch the National Hockey League, you watch junior hockey, college hockey, university hockey, whatever the case may be. It's one of the greatest sports on earth. Invented by Canadians. You've probably heard the name Johnny Gaudreau, also known as Johnny Hockey. He's a superstar on the ice. His brother is a superstar on the ice. So the Blue Jackets forward Johnny Gaudreau and his brother have died. There's no details of what took place. Johnny Gaudreau was 31. His brother Matthew, who also a professional hockey player, was 29. My heartfelt condolences goes out to their family, their friends, their teammates. Whatever happened, a tragic accident. It's pretty sad news. Two young gentlemen, and too young to go. I'm sure days and weeks to come. And it's important to note too that, we allow the families to grieve privately. But in days and weeks to come, we're going to know what led to this tragedy. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, I am off today. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing this show. I booked Friday off because back when I was on holidays, when it was the civic holiday, that was in the first week that I was off in August, the August long weekend. So I've taken this Friday off in lieu of that civic holiday. So I get a 4-day weekend. Happy about that. Return back to work on Tuesday. Now, I also want to mention, too, coming this Wednesday is the 4th of September. Schools all across Ontario, college, universities, all return to class. School buses are going to be rolling again. Children back into school. It's going to be a very, very busy day for parents and kids and the school buses. So if you're one of the parents out there who drop your children off at school, pay attention to the school zone speed limits. Pay attention to the school buses. Pay attention to children who are walking to school. Keep your cell phones out of your frickin' hands. Stop in both directions when the school bus lights are flashing and the stop arm is out. It is the law. So children can have a safe return to the classrooms on Wednesday, September the 4th. I'll mention this throughout the weekend as I'm doing my show. Do a show tomorrow, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. I'll be out here doing the show. But I just want to do just a little thing about how the Labor Day came about in Canada, starting all the way back from 1872, the fight for a shorter work week, 1919, the Winnipeg General Strike, the birth of unemployment insurance, 1945, the Windsor's Ford Strike, the Rand decision, everyone who benefits should pay, that's union dues, 1956, founding of the Canadian Labour Congress, 1965, public service workers win bargaining rights, and of course the right to safety at work, and the maternity and parental benefits. And the labor, the labor force and unions and everything like that, still today are fighting for workers' rights. Fighting for better pay, livable wages, and of course, the public sector, the public service workers, they're clashing with the government today of returning back to the office 3 days a week. They don't want to do that. They want to stay home, work from home, but enjoy all the benefits that they have working from home. They're still employed. They're still service workers. Doesn't mean they lose any of their benefits. But that still is an ongoing thing. But the workforce, the labor movement is always ongoing. Monday is Labor Day Monday. I don't know if they used to have, back in the day, I don't know if they used to have Labor Day parades. I don't know. All I know is that everything is closed on Monday. Get a day off, paid day off. Summertime is the season summer is drawing to an end. Summer holidays are coming to an end. Unless you're able to stretch your holidays into the first week of September, good for you. But other than that, vacations are coming to an end. Summertime, we got for the season, we got something like 3 weeks? 3 weeks and a couple days. September 21st is the first day of fall. Can't believe how fast summer has gone by. And we always say that all the time. God, summer went by so fast. It feels like that. Then we get into the fall and we get into the fall colors, all the leaves changing colors, leaves falling off the trees. And then the white stuff comes. I dread it. I dread winter every year. I'm a summer person, not a winter person. But enjoy your Friday, whatever you're doing today. Enjoy your long weekend and be safe out there. And I will be back out here tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for being here. Also, again, I enjoy your company. This is the Truckers Podcast, FYI. I'm your host, Doug from Ontario, Canada. Be safe out there. Take care. See you tomorrow.